In Chinese, the names Marx and Musk sound very similar, like Marcus and Marcel. So my question would be, who do you see more interest in among Chinese intellectuals, Musk or Marx?
I haven't been reading that much recently because I've been finishing a book, but I think much more in Musk.
Hallo und herzlich willkommen zur 7. Folge von Neu-China. Hallo Hendrik und auch hallo an alle Zuhörer und ZuschauerInnen da draußen. Wir richten nun unseren Blick wieder mal auf die Volksrepublik. Hendrik, klär uns doch mal auf, worum es in dieser Folge geht.
Ja, auch von mir ein Hallo an alle da draußen. Hallo Clara. Und genau, das ist jetzt unsere 7. Folge und es hat mal wieder ewig gedauert. Ja, Entschuldigung dafür. Ich hoffe, ihr könnt es verstehen. Wir haben privat viel um die Ohren gehabt und haben uns heute auch einen Gast organisiert. Da werde ich gleich noch was zu sagen. Genau, was passiert hier dieses Mal? Ja, Parteimitglieder müssen wieder Marx lesen, insbesondere das Kommunistische Manifest. Die Bevölkerung bekommt Fernsehshows wie Marx hat Recht oder auch die Anime-Serie mit Karl Marx, Engels und Jenny von Westphalen im Mittelpunkt. Mit dem schönen Namen. Kannst du das einmal vorlesen?
Marxische Duide.
Und die Serie, die Anime-Serie?
Die Anime-Serie, der Titel heißt Lingfangzhe. Also auf Deutsch Führer oder Führung.
Genau, deine Aussprache ist deutlich besser als meine. Genau, sind das alles nur Einzelfälle oder erlebt der Marxismus unter Xi Jinping einen zweiten Frühling? Oder ist Xi Jinping gar der neue Mao Zedong, wie es in einigen Artikeln im Westen behauptet wird? Genau, wenn wir über Marxismus in China sprechen wollen, kommen wir natürlich auch nicht um Mao Zedong herum, den Gründer der Volksrepublik, wenn man so möchte, natürlich nicht alleine, ist auch klar. Und wollen eben deswegen auch fragen, welche Rolle eigentlich Maos Erbe noch für die Wiederbelebung des Marxismus spielt. Natürlich kommen wir auch nicht über, ich sag mal, den zweiten Elefanten im Raum herum. Das ist Xi Jinping, ihr habt es vielleicht am Titel ja schon erkannt. Genau, natürlich Xi Jinping hat auch theoretische Überlegungen publiziert, die sogenannten Xi-Jinping-Gedanken oder korrekterweise Xi Jinpings Ideen des Sozialismus chinesischer Prägung im neuen Zeitalter. Die, wenn mich nicht alles täuscht, 2017 vorgestellt und 2018 in der Verfassung der Volksrepublik verankert wurden. Genau, wir versuchen so ein bisschen zu klären, was diese Xi Jinping-Gedanken sind, was sie alles umfassen und auch, was sozusagen die Xi Jinping-Gedanken für die intellektuelle Sphäre des Landes spielen.
Wir sind allerdings nicht alleine, um diese große Menge an Fragen zu diskutieren und zu beantworten, sondern wir haben dafür David Ownby eingeladen. Mit ihm werden wir über Xi Jinping-Gedanken und den Diskurs darum sprechen und uns der Frage widmen, welche Rolle Marx und Marxismus in diesen Gedanken spielt. Und außerdem wollen wir auch nach der Interpretation von Marx und marxistischen Gedanken im gegenwärtigen China fragen. Aber bevor wir damit beginnen, will ich kurz ein bisschen darüber sprechen, wer Xi Jinping eigentlich ist und warum wir uns mit den Xi Jinping-Gedanken auseinandersetzen sollten. Also, ich denke, alle unsere Hörer werden wissen, dass Xi Jinping der oberste Mann in der Volksrepublik China ist. Xi Jinping wurde 1953 geboren und war der Sohn von Xi Zhongxun, der zur ersten Führungsgeneration der Volksrepublik gehörte und der 1959 bis 1962 auch stellvertretender Ministerpräsident Chinas war. Unwichtig ist dabei nicht, dass Xi Jinping als sogenannter Prinzling gilt. Und Prinzlinge sind die Kinder oder engen Verwandten von amtierenden oder ehemaligen Führungskadern in der Volksrepublik, in der Kommunistischen Partei oder dem Militär. Und dadurch, dass sie ihre Familienbande haben, haben sie früh Zugang zu Netzwerken innerhalb der Parteielite und erhalten darum auch eine Ausbildung an Top-Universitäten und gelangen darum schnell und einfacher auch an Führungspositionen. Allerdings musste Xi Jinping auch, wie man es in China nennt, Bitterkeit essen. Also auf Chinesisch würde man Ku sagen. Das ist ein geläufiger Ausdruck dafür in der Geschichte der Volksrepublik China, dafür, dass man Not erleidet oder große Entbehrungen ertragen muss. Und zwar wurde der Vater von Xi Jinping in der Kulturrevolution als Gegner der Partei erklärt und eingesperrt Und während Maos Kampagne zur Arbeit in der ländlichen Gegend wurde auch die Familie von Xi in ein Dorf in eine ländliche Gegend in Shanxi geschickt. Und von dort floh Xi Jinping nach kurzer Zeit zurück nach Beijing, weil er es, so hat er es ausgesagt, auf dem Land nicht ausgehalten hat und wurde in Beijing allerdings verhaftet und zurück auf das Land geschickt und musste dort harte Arbeit leisten. Nach der Rehabilitation der Xi-Familie und nach Maos Tod begann dann allerdings Xi mit einer politischen Karriere, genauso wie Xi Jinpings Vater, Xi Zhongxun, der Provinzgouverneur in Guangdong wurde. Und seit 2012 ist Xi Jinping Generalsekretär der Kommunistischen Partei und Vorsitzender der Zentralen Militärkommission. Und seit 2013 ist er dann Staatspräsident der Volksrepublik. In China gilt er als überragender Führer, also auf Chinesisch Zui Gao Ling Dao Ren. China hatte nach Mao auch weitere Präsidenten und Generalsekretäre, aber als überragend gelten nur Mao, Deng Xiaoping und Xi Jinping. Und darüber hinaus wird Xi Jinping in vor allem auch der westlichen Presse häufig die Reideologisierung Chinas vorgeworfen. Oder besonders erkennen tut man das an der Verbreitung der Xi-Jinping-Gedanken. Und über diese wollen wir jetzt in dem Interview mit David Ownby mehr erfahren.
Genau, wer ist David? Ich würde ihn mal kurz vorstellen. David war 3 Jahrzehnte Professor in Montreal für Geschichte mit dem Schwerpunkt Religion im modernen und gegenwärtigen China. Fun Fact: Ich bin auf David zum ersten Mal aufgrund seines Buches über Falun Gong bzw. Falun Dafa gestolpert. Ich weiß nicht, wo ihr lebt, aber in Berlin im Treptower Park sieht man manchmal Repräsentanten der Falun Gong-Bewegung, würde ich es jetzt mal nennen. Und da habe ich mich immer gefragt, sozusagen, was machen die denn? Was ist eigentlich deren Auftrag? Woher kommen die? Und David hat darüber ein Buch geschrieben, das ich dann eben gelesen habe. Das verlinke ich euch auch gerne, zitiere ich euch sozusagen in den Shownotes. Und zu diesem ganzen Falun Gong, Falun Dafa Kosmos, würde ich mal sagen, gehört eben auch diese Epoch Times. Ich weiß nicht, ob ihr das mal gesehen habt, dieses Medienimperium. Und über auch Shen Yun. Vielleicht habt ihr das auch mal gesehen, dieses, ja, weiß nicht, Tanzaufführung. Auf jeden Fall ist es irgendwie eine Aufführung so und da steht immer, immer drunter China vor dem Kommunismus und das bringt mich immer zum Lachen. Man musste mal in die Geschichtsbücher gucken und sich anschauen, wie China vor dem Kommunismus eigentlich aussah.
Ja.
Und nicht so. Also das auf jeden Fall nicht. Genau, und vielleicht habt ihr dazu ja auch die Folge von, ist jetzt schon ein bisschen länger her, von Böhmermanns Neo-Magazin gesehen, wo das auch mal kritisch reflektiert wird. Die verlinken wir euch auch in den Shownotes. Und genau, das sind die eben. Schaut da auch gerne mal rein, guckt euch das Video an. Ähm, genau. Heute ist David auch noch am Max-Planck-Institut für ethnologische Forschung so ein bisschen assoziiert. Aber weswegen wir ihn hauptsächlich auch eingeladen haben, ist, weil er seit 2018 den Blog Reading the China Dream betreibt, den wir euch natürlich auch verlinken und den wir euch sehr, sehr, sehr ans Herz legen. Denn in diesem Blog sozusagen versucht er die intellektuelle Landschaft in China ja, einem breiteren Publikum außerhalb Chinas eben bekannt zu machen und zu zeigen, wie viele verschiedene Arten von Denkweisen es eigentlich gibt, welche Räume sich da eigentlich eröffnen, welche vielleicht aber auch nicht mehr offen sind, wie Kritik vielleicht geäußert werden kann, was auf jeden Fall auch sozusagen die intellektuelle Elite in dem Land denkt, schreibt, publiziert. Sagen. Also er übersetzt das und lädt das dort hoch. Genau, checkt es auch mal aus und tragt euch gerne auch dort für die Newsletter ein. Dann bekommt ihr, ich glaube, alle 14 Tage immer mal ein Update. Und es ist wirklich sehr, sehr interessant. Genau, und findet eben sonst auch kaum Beachtung. Und David haben wir heute gewinnen können, um eben diese ganzen Fragen über Xi Jinping-Gedanken, über Marxismus, welche Rolle spielt das eigentlich, was besagen die eigentlich, bla bla bla, bla, um dem Ganzen mal so ein bisschen, ja, vielleicht nicht beantworten, diese Fragen vielleicht nicht zu beantworten, aber zumindest uns dem Ganzen anzunähern und so ein bisschen zu zeigen, wo eigentlich noch sozusagen ideologische Versatzstücke sind, welche Rolle sie spielen, etc. Kurzer Disclaimer, das Interview haben wir auf Englisch geführt und wir haben es aufgrund der Länge in 2 Teile geteilt. Jetzt folgt der erste Teil und den zweiten schieben wir dann alsbald hinterher. Yeah, it's really a great pleasure to have you here. I'm a vivid reader of your blog,
Thank you.
especially, yeah, I think it's pretty important. And recently in Germany, there were like, I think, two books coming out about like just introducing to the broader public what actually Chinese intellectuals are thinking about
Oh,
and
really?
discussing. Yeah, it's like pretty non-existent, I would say. I don't know
Popular books or academic books?
I think popular books.
But
Oh,
some of
really?
them
Okay.
are also like more leaning into academic text.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we should start with the first question. So our topic today is very broad. It's like Xi Jinping thought, Marxism, current state of it, but also I think it touches the broader topics of nationalism and contemporary Chinese um, intellectual thought, maybe also in a society, and what role it all plays right now. Um, and we want to start with like your stance on what Xi Jinping thought actually is, since it has been added to the constitutional amendments of the PRC in 2018 already. So it's a very broad question, but how would you characterize the Xi Jinping thought, and what do you say? What purpose does it serve today?
Okay, I should start out by saying that I am not formally speaking a Xi Jinping expert. So I've spent some time with him and his thought. But if you had another person on here who spent all day long reading Xi Jinping thought, he or she would probably not be smiling, but they would have different things to say than what I have to say. So I know more than a lot of people do, but there are people who know much more than I do. So if they're listening, I want to acknowledge them. I see Xi Jinping thought, in fact, all of Mao Zedong, Deng Xiaoping thought, all of the various thoughts are Chinese adaptations of Marxism, Leninism to whatever the strategic needs of China are at the moment. And the core of it, of course, is the Communist Party. And it's not hard to realize, whatever we may think of the Communist Party, if you think of Mao Zedong back in the day, he was born in, I think, 1893. So he grew up with the collapse of two Chinas. He grew up with the collapse of the imperial state, and then he grew up with the collapse of the Republican state, which was meant to replace it. And by the time he was 25 or 30, China was just an utter mess, at the mercy of the Japanese eventually, warlords everywhere. And it was very difficult for average Chinese people or elites or anybody to imagine their future and live a decent life. In that kind of context, a tool like the Communist Party can seem immensely valuable as some way to put people together and organize them around a certain number of principles. I think it mattered a lot that it was about, I mean, Marxism is supposed to be for the working classes and the poor. I think that was a very big rallying cry at that time. And then as China moved on to wartime situations and the communists mounted an army to fight back against the Japanese and eventually against the nationalists, then Mao's thought turned in that direction, how Marxism or Leninism could be used to help China prosecute the war effort. And then as it moved forward, that China faced new challenges, and the thought of Mao Zedong evolved to deal with those new challenges. Now, I think Mao Zedong was probably an ambitious thinker, who probably, while sitting in the caves in Yunnan, at the same time he was divorcing his second wife and marrying his third and doing all the other things they did with his free time, probably did think about issues of philosophy or some effort at deep thinking, and how what Marx wrote in Germany and what Lenin had done in Russia might relate to the Chinese situation. Later iterations of thought, be it Deng Xiaoping thought or Xi Jinping thought, I have a hard time. Again, I'm not a specialist on the church history of Marxism, so I don't read all that kind of stuff. I don't see them as being all that philosophically deep. I mean, Deng Xiaoping meant to address, I mean, the big question was, what do we do now that Maoism failed, right? He's coming out of the Cultural Revolution, which had been started out as sort of a utopian reimagination of what the world might be and ended up in a disaster where all of China was frightened and sort of depoliticized and completely lost. And Deng Xiaoping opened things up and they saw the world and realized that the world was much richer and more powerful than China. So the idea was we got to shake ourselves up, wake ourselves up, and get out there and make some money. So that, I mean, Deng Xiaoping thought was basically how to be pragmatic while keeping the Communist Party. Because once you've got the Communist Party, you really don't want to let it go. I mean, most political parties are the same way. They're in there to get power. The Communist Party has been more ruthless than parties in the West in general, although parties are often very ruthless. And once you succeed, you're not going to let it go. So that was Deng Xiaoping's thought, was how do we pragmatically think ourselves out of the box that Mao Zedong has left us in, where we're poor, depoliticized, demotivated. The party has lost its legitimacy, and it still had power. They had all the guns and they had the government, so they weren't about to fall apart. But belief in the party was kind of at a low ebb. So that worked. And over the course of the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s, it bore fruit, and China got wealthier and wealthier, and now it's kind of number 2 in the world. So Xi Jinping comes in at that moment when China has reached kind of, I mean, China has, under Xi Jinping, has returned to its status as a world power, which it has always felt it should. I think this is deeply, deeply felt in China by intellectuals, by most people, the notion that China was historically great and deserves to be it again. I'm in Italy right now, and I was in Tuscany staying with people who are from Tuscany, and the way they talked about history. And I mean, you can see monuments and history just when you look around, and it reminds you of what Italy was in the past and what Italy has become. I come from rural United States. We have no monuments and no history whatsoever. So it's just impressive to me to see or to understand how someone can feel about it. China is the same way. So when China actually succeeds, when China's rise in the 1990s and the 2000s, and then when they realized that China had sort of risen, when intellectuals and the elite realized that this is working, I think this was one of the few moments of sort of generalized optimism in recent Chinese history. I think China and Chinese leaders have lived with a sense of impending doom or possible failure for a long time. The 1990s, for instance, the fall of the Soviet Union was a huge, huge, huge deal for China because, I mean, we focus on Tiananmen, which is a huge deal as well. But inside China, the fall of the Soviet Union was just, the world is sort of ending. Not that they loved the Soviet Union, they'd been at loggerheads with them for a long time, but that was the model on which China was built. And Gorbachev was doing what they were hoping to do with reform and opening, and then it fell apart just almost overnight. And it didn't become a liberal democracy. It became a smaller state with less influence and less territory, and everything that China did not want to do. So when China sort of managed to pull it off in the 2000s, this was making China great again, right? That they were back. And Xi Jinping, just out of luck, happened to assume the mantle of power at the moment that this was occurring. So I think what Xi Jinping thought is, in terms of its social function, is to reinforce the power of the Communist Party. This is first and foremost. He comes from that kind of lineage. And also over the course of reform and opening and making money and opening up to the world, China got a lot looser in terms of corruption, in terms of attitudes, in terms of money making, in terms of everything, you know? I mean, you've been to China, Chinese people are outspoken and ambitious and creative and innovative. I don't think I could could manage a group of 25 Chinese people, much less a country of however many 1.3 or 4 billion they are. And that's a huge challenge, even with 90 million members of the Communist Party. So one thing that he saw was that, and it's very true, China had become sort of intellectually pluralistic over the course of reform and opening. And you can't have that if you're Xi Jinping, because once you admit intellectual pluralism, then why not political pluralism, right? If you can think different things about important issues and argue about them in public ways, at some point someone will say, well, why can't we question the legitimacy of the party? Which a lot of them are kind of doing sub rosa anyway. So the first thing he wants to do is sort of tighten that up, which he did with his still ongoing anti-corruption campaign. Something that's very popular almost everywhere, right? Any government that roots out corruption, even especially in its own ranks, people love that. It's populist, and it also tightens up the control at the top. So it was very smart, and it scared a lot of people who weren't even corrupt, because the way China was working in the 2010s, right before Xi Jinping came to power, there was money everywhere. So everybody with any kind of position or anything could be accused of corruption. I mean, it was just that kind of place. There was money everywhere floating around. So if you wanted to call somebody corrupt, you just called them corrupt. So my intellectual friends were all very worried, although, I mean, their corruption was like what? Staying in a better hotel when they went on a conference, or getting a better book deal than their colleague. I don't know. I have no idea what intellectual corruption might be, but they were all worried. I remember they talked about it a lot. On After that, Xi Jinping thought, I think, really means to consider what it means for China to be a great power again in a world dominated by the United States. So a lot of his thinking has to do with this sort of national security, total national security, which is a scary concept, but I understand what he means. I mean, and I don't support Xi Jinping, and I don't like a lot of what he does, but I can see why he would do that. I mean, if you're not an American, America looks like a hegemon that doesn't play fair on a lot of issues. So if I'm China and I'm climbing up the ladder, I want to make sure I've got things, pretty well put together, pretty well solidified, pretty well protected. I mean, this is why they play the hard games they play, like in the South China Sea. I mean, if I were China, I wouldn't like Americans' presence throughout the region with bases, in Singapore and the Philippines and Japan and wherever they are. I mean, China is sort of encircled by this country that they're not sure what their intentions are. And part of that is military, of course, and he's rooted out corruption, or I don't know if his military officers were really corrupt or if it's just an excuse to get rid of them. And he's done various other things in the military that I don't know a whole lot about. But part of it is also kind of preaching to the Chinese people to be confident in themselves. Much of his thought, if you try to Google it or look for it online, consists of, the 8 commitments and the 14 somethings, just these lists of things, and they're very sloganistic. And at first glance, they don't mean anything at all to me. It just looks like, a cheerleader kind of trying to keep the crowd engaged, which is sort of what he's doing. And a lot of it has to do with self-confidence, which then again has to do with China's, century of humiliation, and then the sort of repeated failures of the revolution. I mean, they had glorious moments followed by complete disasters.
Mm-hmm.
And what he's wanting to say is, look, we finally made it. And part of what he's saying to intellectuals anyway is stop liking America, because many Chinese intellectuals really liked the American model. They wanted to be Democrats. They wanted to be a great power like Taiwan could be if it were a big place, like America is. I think Trump may be ruining that completely by now. So in 10 years, I might not tell the same story. But it is still the case that most Chinese intellectuals and a lot of Chinese business people are basically liberals. I mean, they basically look at the world in the way that I started to say that you and I look at the world, but I don't know how you look at the world. But it's just that there are a lot of shared viewpoints between Americans and Chinese in terms of Chinese liberals, in terms of how they would like the world to work. They'd like to have a constitution. They'd like to have human rights. They'd like to have some control on political power. Neither Americans nor Chinese particularly have those right now, but liberals on both sides of the equation think in similar ways. Xi Jinping would like them to stop that. Xi Jinping would like them to become fully confident in China as a great power. And he can't really define what China as a great power is, because there's no real definition. There's no real content to that. It's a slogan, but it's something you
Yeah.
do feel. So he also wants them to help him do that. So he's, on the one hand, he's saying it's kind of a bluster, look where we are, we're great, let's stand up for ourselves. It's a nationalistic kind of thing.
Mm.
But behind it, there's also this suspicion that they haven't quite achieved their potential yet. So he's asking intellectuals and everyone to help, to not to devote necessarily their entire selves to the mission of making China great again or rejuvenating the Chinese nation, but leaving some space in their thought. Or actually, he's much more insistent than that. So I think that's what it is. And he does, I mean, that covers everything from, patriotic education, where youth are taught a very party-centered, of course, it's a party-centered history of China, designed to defeat other narratives coming in from outside, which is very hard. I mean, we talk a lot about the great firewall of China that keeps ideas out. It's a very porous firewall. Lots of people have, the VPN so they can get around the wall. And people move in and out. The pandemic slowed it down. But in general, reform and opening has transformed the way Chinese people see the world because they know what the world is. They've been out there, or they see pictures, or they watch movies, or they watch American TV shows, or whatever. So there are other aspects too. I mean, there are technological aspects where total national security implies like surveillance. The surveillance state is quite a thing in China, and that can be really nasty, as in Xinjiang.
Mm.
Or it can be other things. I mean, I was in China last September and went for a vacation with a Chinese friend, and we took his car and drove from Beijing to Shandong. And I hadn't been driving in China for a long time. And it was amazing because between Beijing and Shandong, which was, I don't know, 5 or 6 hours, we were photographed hundreds, if not thousands of times. And uh, I
You
didn't
mean
see
on the street, like on the crossroads, these like pictures taken every
on the
time?
highways,
Yeah,
in
yeah,
the city, everywhere.
yeah.
There are cameras everywhere. It's a nationwide network, and they know who you are because they scan your whatever. And I don't know if it's a QR code somewhere on the car or just a license plate or whatever. But it works because I didn't see a policeman anywhere on the highways in the cities, and yet everyone drives so much better than they used to. When I first went to China, which was a long time ago, the only people who drove were ex-army types, and they drove like there was a battle on the other side of the hill. These people were absolutely crazy that you could not get them to slow down. They were having so much fun driving without their commanding officer looking at them. And lots of my friends learned to drive when they were 40 and 50, and they're just terrible drivers because you never really master it unless you start young enough and it becomes automatic. They don't have the reflexes. I mean, they're okay, but I kind of close my eyes when I ride with them. But everyone else, if you cross a white line where you're not supposed to, and they get you on camera, they just take the money out of your bank account. I mean, and if you do it 5 times, if you do something bad enough, they just take your license away. And you can go contest, but the state just says, well, here's the picture. What do you want? And I mean, Americans would never put up with this because we think we're free. But Chinese, they don't have a choice. And I gotta say, it works really well. Most people drive properly and it's not chaos. It's so that's, I mean, I don't know if that's a conscious part of the Xi Jinping thought about total national security, but it's the kind of thing that's going on in China a lot, where they apply surveillance and big data and all this kind of stuff to all kinds of things. And, if China gets rich and powerful and Trump destroys America, this kind of model will spread throughout the world because ideas follow power. I mean, I gotta say, I would hate that as a driver because I drove up in the American countryside driving like an idiot and enjoying it. But it's a much better way to deal with problems of traffic and discipline on the road than just, a policeman who is at a corner for 30 minutes every 2 days and surprises the bad driver with a ticket. So that kind of thing is part of Xi Jinping thought as well, I think. And we saw that in the pandemic with the way in which they managed all the vaccinations and the quarantines. And I'm sure there's this social credit sort of thing where social credit, again, that's a surveillance thing, which attempts to sort of fill in the gaps between Chinese law, which is sort of halfway there, and the practice of business or just general life at the local level. I mean, China is generally pretty safe, but there's still a lot of scams and cheats out there. A lot of business people that don't do what they're supposed to do. I don't know if they're more in China than Germany or Italy or America. I have no idea. But the idea of the social credit system is to find those people and dissuade them from doing
Mm.
that. And one of the ways you do it is not let them get on an airplane. And getting on an airplane is a
Or
good way to go
trains.
make money somewhere, or a train.
Yeah.
So stay home and think about your sins, right? And I would hate that. But most people in China think it's a great idea. I mean, I haven't met anyone who's sitting at home because they got dinged by the system. They
Yeah.
presumably do not like it. And I've read about people who have been presumably unfairly targeted or overpunished.
Mm.
I mean, if you're an aggressive entrepreneur, the line between being pushy and being innovative and cheating can be very hard to distinguish. And I mean, I don't know how it works in detail. I think it's very localized in China at present.
Yeah, so I actually when when I was in China, I was thinking like I think the degree to which Chinese people scam Chinese people is like exorbitant. It's super big. It's
Yeah.
crazy. I saw it on the street where where the scooter is coming and like nearly hitting a person, or the person is like acting as if and then cries on the street,
Oh,
and everyone is
okay.
ignoring because nobody wants to be involved in anything. It's like this kind of scam. I think it's like getting less and less and less, and this is
It's
part
like
of it.
flopping in soccer and
Yeah,
football.
totally. Yeah. And so yeah, it was pretty funny to watch the scenery. So, but so you would argue that the Xi Jinping thought is hard to define, which I think is a characteristic of like basically all the sloganized political communication in a way. And but one more point is that I would like to ask you, do you think it succeeds? I mean, when we look at the social order that is maintained, it's also often used as like a very pro argument. As you said, it like China is safe, and what you told me about the degree of surveillance. I mean, it leads to this, I don't know if age-old discussion, but still ongoing discussion about yeah, safety and surveillance in a way.
Right, 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 right.
That is one thing, and I just recently discussed with my colleagues the issue that actually, when it comes to foreign policy measures, since Xi Jinping took over, actually nearly every relation to the neighboring states declined, like
Yeah,
went pretty bad.
yeah.
I think only Laos and Cambodia is an exception there. But would you say
Yeah,
in this degree, there's like hyper nationalism, this like super self-confident way of, I mean, I don't think it's even hidden, but it's like this restoring empire thought. Yeah, do you think in this regard it's on the way to fail? What would you say to this?
Oh, I mean, what they worry about is like when Chinese political scientists think about a democratic transition. I think in the West, we sort of imagine that, well, we imagine China will follow the Soviet Union and collapse like that. Or we imagine that one day the Communist Party is going to say, yeah, you're right. Let's become democratic.
Mm,
They all think about cases like Thailand, where they attempted a democratic transition and it didn't work, right? Where they get kind of stuck between you have a military coup, you have an election, nobody believes the election, the military comes back in, uh, and that you can't really develop if that's what's going on all the time. And I don't know a lot about Thailand. I just chose that example because it came to mind. That's what they worry about, and that's what Xi Jinping, I think, was attempting. He was trying to make sure that China didn't go that route again by cutting down on pluralism and trumpeting this hyper nationalism. I mean, it works for some things, it works less well for other things, is what it seems to me. I don't know if it's ultimately sustainable. Um, I mean, you have to deliver on your promises. And the way people decide whether you're delivering is they look at their own situation and they look around them, right? So China, yes, it irritates its neighbors in ways that it doesn't have to do, and in ways that belie. I mean, when they talk foreign policy, they talk harmony, right? That America is a brutal, violent hegemon. China represents a hope for peace and order in the world. But you're absolutely right. And everyone around them can't stand them, which is why American bases are still there. So I don't think their foreign policy is particularly successful in that sense. Now, Trump may turn that around by being even more irritating than the Chinese. It may only take a year or two for people to say, well, we can't trust America anymore, and China doesn't look that bad. If China is sensible, they will play that card. I'm not following it that carefully to see what they're doing, but it's I don't know. I mean, they're very clever. Domestically, I mean, I've never heard any intellectuals say anything nice about Xi Jinping. They all just can't stand him. So it's not working at that level. On the other hand, I mean, China kind of works these days. You traveled there, right? I mean, my
Mhm.
impression when I traveled there is that this is a very functional society in terms of buying subway tickets and getting on a plane and taking a train and getting where you want to go and getting food delivered at any place. I mean, I've
Anytime,
never,
yeah.
anytime, any place, any food you want. I was on a train from Beijing to Shanghai, I think, and it stopped somewhere, and they delivered food when we stopped at the train station. Somebody,
Mhm.
somebody was there on a motorcycle on the platform, just handing food in to the guys, which is pretty remarkable. So all that stuff works. At the same time, young people can't find jobs. If young people can't find jobs, the government won't be popular for very long, because it invested massively in the education system because 25 years ago it was very small and lots of people wanted to go and they couldn't go, so they invested money and they hugely enlarged it so that most people who want to get to university can get to some university, maybe not the one they want. But now, in the last 3 years or so, the job market has dried up. So now Chinese students are doing gap years, which no Chinese parent likes at all. They don't want them to stay in school or get a job or something like that. And other things like just events, like the way the zero COVID policy ended in December of 2022. That was just a huge blow to youth belief in government competence. I think most Chinese young people under the age of 40 say they know the government's authoritarian, but they think it's largely competent and it can do big things. That was just such a mess when they decided kind of overnight that this disease, which everyone had been dreading as a plague for 3 years, it just became kind of a bad cold overnight, right? And they said, oh well, we'll stop enforcing all those disciplinary measures that have been in place. And then over the course of the following months, like hundreds of thousands of people died. I was in Beijing like in May of 23, so while people were still in shock about this. And I was stunned. I'd never seen people talk that way about their government. It was like post-traumatic stress syndrome. Or Chinese women are thoroughly pissed off with the Chinese patriarchy, and with good reason, because they really haven't evolved very much. And that's not just the party, that's pretty much most Chinese men. So feminist discourse has moved outside of China because they can't say anything, but it gets back from New York and Paris. So there's a lot of discontent, which will not be handled by this hyper nationalism. I mean, that just falls on deaf ears. If you can't get a job, the fact that China's great
No
no
sense, yeah.
makes no sense, right? Or if you, as a woman, can't fight for your own rights in China because the party smacks you down, then you don't care whether China's great or not. You just want something basic to change. So a lot depends on how the trade wars turn out, whether China can figure out how to change its economy so that people have more money to buy stuff. I have a fair amount of confidence. I mean, they seem to be, I don't know if it's Xi Jinping or the people around him. I don't really know how all that works, but they seem to be fairly sensible about a lot of things. Xi Jinping ideologically tends to support state-owned enterprises, which a lot of people think he shouldn't. There's a lot of liberal economists and just business people in China that think the state-owned enterprises have got it easy because they have ready supplies of capital and they have certain markets that the state is more or less reserved for them. And it's not a level playing field, quite obviously. But Xi Jinping thinks that's sort of a bulwark against capitalism taking over. And we've seen over the course of his 2 or 3 mandates now that he has slapped down the capitalist class, right? I mean, there was a growing, every president or prime minister finds out within the first 6 months of office that there are people with more power than he has, like the people with more money, a bigger jet, more followers on whatever platform they're working on. Xi Jinping didn't want that, so he has slapped down the Jack Ma's and who's the guy's name? The real estate guy, Ren Zhiqiang, was it? Some real estate guy with big liberal mouth, and he shut him up. So I don't know. It's a constant battle. It's not a disaster. And I mean, in the United States, because of the Cold War heritage, journalists almost always talk about China as if it's going to collapse within the next 6 months.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
just an undertone and there's the poor Professor Gordon Chang who has written the China's collapse.
Yeah,
He's on the 15th edition now, which is
now,
sort of
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I've seen it too.
it's
It's
sort
already
of
a
like
meme, right? Yeah.
I think I don't know him at all, and I hope he has a good sense of humor, but I suspect he doesn't. But I mean, it doesn't seem to me like it's on its last legs. It seems to me like they're very capable of experimenting and looking forward. I mean, a 5-year plan could be a complete waste of time, or it could be a good idea. It depends how you do it. And that's something else that I've not really studied, how they do their 5-year plans and whether they work. But you look at the United States and they can't do a 5-day plan, right? I mean, it's just, at least China has a structure that's thinking about what's going on, trying to project ideas forward. I mean, Trump may wind up redoing the global order, but he won't know why he did it or where he's going, or what the consequences will be. I don't know how thoughtful Xi Jinping is, but I think the Chinese Communist Party can be quite thoughtful and responsive in a way that we'll kind of see. I was talking to somebody the other day who said that he thinks, is an Italian China specialist, he thinks that the liberal ideas that may save the world might come out of China as things move forward. Because liberals, although they've lost their position as the main spokesman for intellectuals, they're still in there trying to think of ways to keep authoritarianism from kind of devouring the world. That was a very long answer. Sorry.
I want to get into one aspect maybe of Xi Jinping thought, and that is how far Marxist theory is part of Xi Jinping thought or informing Xi Jinping thought, and how the Marxist thought or the lessons drawn from Marxist theory differ today compared to the ones in the 1950s.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, China doesn't really have, or they don't talk anymore about a working class or about poor people. And they sort of, I mean, some people say outright. I'm thinking more of an intellectual who's on Xi Jinping thought's side and argues for him. He says, most of that stuff is kind of irrelevant to us now because socialism has succeeded. We're making people richer. We're getting them out of the villages into the cities. Of course, there are poor people. Of course, there are disadvantaged people in China, but they think they've got the tools they need to make that better and to improve things continually. So Marxism now, I don't think it's just an appendage of the Communist Party in terms of its ideas. And when, for instance, college students organize Marxist study groups on college campuses, they get arrested because those are revolutionary ideas, and they're talking to the workers that aren't happy. And so, no, you can't be doing that. They try now to kind of suggest that Marxism is like Confucianism in that they're both kind of a search for perfection in some way. I don't find that argument in any way convincing. Um, I don't see how Marxism is really a search for perfection. I mean, the dialectic doesn't really lead to perfection, does it? Maybe it does. I don't know. But the reason they do that is that they want to ground their regime legitimacy more in tradition than in Marxism, because most people in China don't care at all about Marxism. Whereas Chinese tradition is something that touches people, even if they don't really know why. So they'd like to play on that emotional reaction to the notion of Chinese tradition by filling it with something specific. And so they're kind of reinventing Confucianism to mean that, mean some kind of search for perfection. And they use other Confucian slogans. Uh, there's a there's a group of intellectuals called Mainland New Confucians in China who pitched these ideas towards Xi Jinping. I think at present they've lost. When he first came to power in 2012, 2013, no one really knew who he was. And a lot of people thought that he might be a liberal or he might be a Confucian. He was not a big name when he came to power. And he was very sort of quiet. He's not quiet anymore, but the first couple of years he was kind of not quiet, but he was kind of mysterious about what he actually thought about things. So New Confucians could pitch ideas to him, and they did. They went kind of crazy in 2012 and 2013, writing big Confucian ideas. And a friend of mine, a New Confucian, wrote them in his talk. He called Xi Jinping Xi Dada, which is sort of Daddy Xi or Papa Xi or something like that, which is the term Xi Jinping uses about himself to suggest that he's beloved by the masses. And it is not at all a term that intellectuals use when they talk about Xi Jinping. I mean, it's so this was kind of brown nosing in the really cringy way. But he was really trying to push these ideas, saying, we don't really need Marxism. Let's just call it Confucianism and move on. Well, he didn't do that, obviously, but Xi Jinping still every now and then sort of genuflects toward Confucianism as part of the Chinese 3,000 years of Chinese civilization, and he gives it whatever content he wants to. So to my reading, the nuts and bolts of Marxism, everyone in China kind of knows them in the way everyone in the United States can cite the Pledge of Allegiance or something like that. But I don't think lots of people give much thought to them. I don't know what party members actually spend their time thinking about. Presumably they know more. They have to go to these study sessions, but I just don't. I don't really know. Someone else would know more about that. But I don't find the nuts and bolts of Marxism to be meaningful to Xi Jinping thought. It's just you can't say we're the Communist Party without Marxism. That just that doesn't work. So that's how I see that.
So, yeah, I think the debate on whether Marxism and Confucianism can work together or the similarities between them is like very interesting to observe, and could be like most prominently seen probably in the TV show called When Marx Met Confucius.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So maybe you can get further into how this debate unfolds in China, how Marxism and Confucianism are seen as
compatible.
Yeah, exactly.
I haven't seen the show. I've read about the show a little bit. The arguments, there are lots of different arguments about it. Most of them have to do with benevolence and, paternalistic rule of the people. Actually, it has nothing to do with Marx. It has much more to do with authoritarianism. But other people make other arguments as well. There's a famous guy who wrote about red Confucianism. I never got around to reading him carefully, so I don't know exactly what his argument was. There were other people who argue that China had sort of a latent or invisible constitutional rule under the empire. These may be more liberals than Confucians, but it's very hard to tell. I think for the central part for Xi Jinping and those who are on his side, it's pretty simple. It's that notion that Confucianism is good, Marxism is good. We want them both. And it's a branding exercise more than anything else. I haven't read.
Quick question: Do you think they think Marxism is good, or would you rather agree that they think Marxism is necessary?
It has been useful in the past,
Hmm.
and discarding it would be extremely difficult. They can not talk about it, or they can sort of talk about it in a superficial way, which is what I think they do.
Mhm.
Now, of course, if Xi Jinping were sitting here, he could cite Marxism, letter and verse from the Marxist classics. I'm quite sure he's had a long history in that. And he may see his own personal struggle in terms of the dialectic, or I don't know, I have no idea how the man thinks about things. Um, but I don't think his worldview, I think most of this is a branding exercise, how you present yourself to the people, to the intellectuals, in the hopes of getting them on your side. And I don't think there's a whole lot of intellectual content to that, is my impression.
My next question would be how far Xi Jinping thought can be seen in the tradition of Maoism and Maoist thought, and also how many parallels there are between Xi Jinping thought and Maoist thought.
Okay. I mean, they're both strategic responses to particular situations, but Xi Jinping thought is much closer to simply right authoritarianism. Maoism had streaks of real chaos and anarchism in it, as we see in the Cultural Revolution. And that I don't think we see at all in Xi Jinping thought. Again, his idea, or I think his ambition with his thought is to secure China's position as a superpower. So he's thinking about everything the state and the people need to step up to this new and old position in the world and carry out whatever tasks come with it successfully. I think that's what he's working with. Mao had way more complicated ideas about what revolution might be, about who the people were, about being betrayed by the revisionist bureaucracy around him. Some of that just had to do with where China was on its developmental path, because it wasn't rich and powerful, really. It was loud and noticeable, but it wasn't rich and powerful. Now it's pretty rich and powerful. So that's what Xi Jinping is dealing with.
Genau, das war der erste Teil. Bei Kritik gerne melden. Wir sind über jegliche Kommentare sehr glücklich und versuchen natürlich alles zu beantworten.
Ich hoffe, ihr habt viel über Xi-Jinping-Gedanken gelernt. Die Quellen und Davids Blog haben wir in den Shownotes verlinkt und auch die Links zu unseren Social-Media-Seiten dort reingepackt. Vielen Dank fürs Anhören und 再见.
Und auch von mir. Bis zum nächsten Mal. Ciao.